We are just thrilled and blessed to have the Reverend Dan Rift with us. Dan is the director of ELCA World Hunger and Disaster Appeal. He's been with us in our community for a few days now. He was one of the keynote speakers for the Western North Dakota Synod Assembly that just concluded its meeting yesterday, and then he was able to stick around and be with us this weekend. So it's a blessing to have Dan with us, and for our shared partnership in ministry in so many ways through World Hunger that he'll share with us this morning.
Reading from the book of Acts, chapter 6, verses 1 through 7. Now, during those days when the disciples were increasing in number, the Hellenists complained against the Hebrews because their widows were being neglected in the daily distribution of food. And the 12 called together the whole community of disciples and said, "It is not right that we should neglect the word of God in order to wait at tables. Therefore, friends, select from among yourselves 7 men of good standing, full of the spirit of wisdom, whom we may appoint to this task, while we, for our part, will devote ourselves to prayer and to serving the word." What they said pleased the whole community, and they chose Stephen, a man full of faith and the Holy Spirit, together with Philip, Prochorus, Nicanor, Timon, Paramenes, and Nicholas, a proselyte of Antioch. They had these men stand before the apostles, who prayed and laid their hands on them. The word of God continued to spread. The number of disciples increased greatly in Jerusalem, and a great many of the priests became obedient to the faith. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Well, I want to thank you. I'll have several thanks in the next little bit, but I want to thank you first just for sharing the experience of being church with me this weekend. It's really been terrific. The Synod Assembly is what brought me here, but this has been such a wonderful community, such a great house of worship here that you gather in on a regular basis. I've loved this. I have to say, as thrilling and exciting as the experience that we've had this morning, I've been so moved by just the announcements. I hardly say that. When I was a pastor in a church, the thing I hated to do most was announcements. I have to say, it was the hardest. It is harder to do announcements than anything else because you have to remember all the things and then remember not to forget all those things. But I love that you're going to have tonight. If I can be back here by 6:30, I want a little gospel. I hope you can come for that. I particularly want to say Susan Smith is an amazing missionary. The fact that God is calling forth missionaries through the Lutheran Church to be around the world, and that mission is not just from us to the rest of the world, but for us to hear and to see and to learn what the Spirit is doing in places like Cameroon and Central African Republic is really terrific. And I hope you have a chance on Wednesday to come and hear her. And then I saw the thing about the World Refugee Day. You know, we share as Lutherans many ways in the refugee situation that's going on to extend ourselves. Most of us have a history in our life, in our families, of being a refugee or an immigrant, and that has brought us here. We are the legacy of that, and so I hope you can consider that as well. Anyway, it's in the bulletin. What a great congregation to see that what is happening inside of these walls is not just about us and about this space, but it is how we're drawn to live this out in the rest of the world. And I want to talk a little bit about that today. I want to start with the gospel because I think it's a very interesting passage from Acts today. The situation is flowing right in the middle of this story of what's happened after Pentecost. So there is this promise that we will be a church extended to Jerusalem, to Judea, to the ends of the earth. And what's happened here is this message of Jesus and the coming together into a community is taking root. Now, it started with a bunch of Hebrews. Remember that? A bunch of Hebrews. That's our history. It is our legacy. It is where we started. It is who Jesus is. And then there's some others that have come into this community. These Greeks. It says Hellenist in the text, but those are the Greeks. And all of a sudden, the Greeks say, hey, wait a minute. Our widows are being ignored when it comes to the extension of the support that you're providing in terms of the feeding of the widows. You know, this ethnic division, this unfairness that happens in the world is something that we continue to be confronted with. So it's interesting that we see it all the way back to the beginning of our roots as a church. And the response of the apostles, the 12, it says, the apostles at that time are very interesting. First of all, remember, these are the same 12, or 11 of them anyway, that when they were faced with 5,000 hungry people on a hillside said, we'll send them away and have them go find something to eat. So at least they've learned a little bit since then, because they start to say, you know what, this isn't fair and we have a responsibility. It's really amazing. And then what they say, though, is we got to preach and we've got to teach and, you know, maybe we'll find some other people who can take care of these. So let's get the right people to do that. This affirmation of gifts is great. And then they call the 7 that I talked about. I'll come back to that in a minute. But in this passage, food, the care for the widows, is about a whole lot more than food. And we see this all the way through our life as church. And I would say we even see it when we do something like this silly little pink pig that was part of the ingathering of resources to help during your time of Lent. Food is about a whole lot more than food. It's true in the breaking of bread and in the cup. The substance of the restoration of our life in water is about more than water. And in this case, this is about the inclusion of those who have been left out. The table that is broader than just the Hebrew people, that is to the Greeks as well, to the expansion of the gospel. And if you follow the pathway of the life of these 7 who were simply called to wait on tables. Did you catch that? Oh, we have too much to do than to wait on tables. It's those 7, if you go through history, that are responsible for sharing of the gospel in such a way, sharing of the good news of Jesus Christ, that the promise of the reality spreads out to the rest of the world. This feeding of the world, this caring for one another, isn't some specialized ministry that we go off to the side. It is integral to who we are as church. The tables that we share in this worship space, the tables that we share when we are at fellowship in church, the tables that we share in our households, and the tables of the world that extend around the world, places we will never know. Tables that don't even look like tables, but might be mats, grass mats, or other ways in which people gather together in food is about a whole lot more than just food. The promise that we live in the Pentecost time is that the gospel, the good news of Jesus Christ, the love of God shares and spreads from Jerusalem to Judea to Samaria to the ends of the earth. If you're sitting in Jerusalem and you ask where the ends of the earth are, you might just end up in Bismarck. So these 7 who are just there to wait on tables and share food among the poor may indeed be the reason that we are here today. Integrating our hunger work with our church life, our response to hunger, is something that comes almost naturally. So first, ELCA, the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, that's this congregation and 9,600 other congregations, about 1.5 million people who are worshiping in ELCA congregations this weekend around the United States and the Caribbean, but we're part of a almost 80 million believers family spread around the world. And what is astounding to me is there are more Lutherans in Tanzania, in this country in Central Africa, than there are in North America, in the United States. There are more Lutherans in Indonesia, which many of us don't consider, wouldn't even think of the fact that there's such a large population of Christians in Indonesia, but more Lutherans in Indonesia than there are in the U.S. And we're part of this family called Lutheran World Federation, and it's one of the ways that we are active in the church, and in other ways are through our missionaries, and other ways are through our companion churches around the world. And we stand with them in their time of joy, we stand with them in their time of hardship, and they with us as well. And one of the ways we stand with them are silly things like pink pigs. So let me talk a little bit about what happens. We share resources together as the church in a program called ELCA World Hunger, the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America's response to hunger around the world. We try to do that efficiently and effectively. Part of the reason we can do it effectively is because we work through people who are already in those communities. And part of the reason we can do it effectively is because you are part of it. We envision it as pigs, but like anything else, food is more than food. Pigs are more than pigs. So I'll tell you a pig story. In Haiti, the poorest country in this hemisphere, we are the pig people in Western Haiti. The Lutherans are. I don't know why. There's another area where we are the coffee and avocado and citrus people because we've taught grafting, how to graft commercially viable products onto traditional rootstock so that you can get more, so that simple smallholder farmers can get more money. We have helped in irrigation and we've helped in control of floods. But somewhere in Western Haiti, we've become the pig people. And it's $30. That's the cost of a pig. So if you contributed $30 in one of those little pig banks, that is the cost of the pig, and the family has to come up with $10 to pay for the veterinary bills and for the initial food. So the family that receives the pig has an investment in this pig. And if you get a pig, you have to pass on 2 of the offspring from the first litter. If you sell your pig, you have to pass back $60, twice the value of that piglet, back to the program, so that this is not an investment we're making over and over and over again in the same family or even in the same community. It's a way in which it spreads that responsibility on from neighbor to neighbor in the same way that we are helping with those folks. But the other thing you have to do is you join a pig club. So the pig club is, if you get a pig, you have to join a pig club. And mostly the pigs are taken care of by the children, by the young boys. I don't know, how old are you and the kid that's in stripes here? How old is he? 10. So 8, 9, 10-year-olds. So you would be right there. You would be a member of a pig club if you had a pig. And you would and I was there when they were bringing the piglets on a leash, on a rope, to see the vet. And they had little pig songs for their pig clubs, like pigs are our school fees. They've been translated to pigs are our school fees. Pigs are our health care. Pigs are, they said, our umbilical cords, our life. They're our substance. We think of it as a $30 pig. For them, it's the ability to go to school. It's the promise and hope and possibility. But it's also the community coming together. It's sustainability. It's possibility for the future. It is a better life for children. Sometimes food, sometimes pigs are about a lot more than just pigs. I've been telling stories this morning, so I'm going to tell you a different one than I told folks in the other worship services. And I'm not going to tell you the goat story, so you'll have to just ask your friends who are at other services about the goat story, because I want to tell you about chickens. There is this thing that's happened in the ELCA. It's the most ridiculous thing in the world, which is a little coloring sheet that's called Buck a Chick. Have you done that here? I don't know if you've done that here. The artwork is really, the first one was really bad. Somebody said, you have duck feet on your chicken. Really bad, and people color these chickens, and it costs about $1 for a chicken. One of my favorite, and there's chickens all over the world. You know, there are more chickens in the world than there are people. I don't know if you knew that. One of my favorite though, examples of what happens with the chicken comes from Mexico. So I'm sorry, I'm telling you two things from our hemisphere. But I was in Mexico City, and what happens in Mexico City is people who have to leave the countryside end up in the city, and they come around the city in the newest slum area. And you get cardboard and maybe a piece of corrugated tin, and you lean it up against a wall, and that's where you live until you can get enough money to start to build, afford bricks and to start to build. And the program that we work with there, Amextra, a Christian program that's a cooperative program, helps with those people who show up. Well, I met a woman, Mary, who had shown up on the outskirts with her 2 small children to get out of an abusive situation in her household. It has to be pretty bad if you're desperate enough to go into that situation with your kids. And was living in that kind of a situation. And our friends in Amextra, with the support that you had provided, came through ELCA World Hunger, came to help Mary and her family, and to start to train them. And they do nutrition work, and they do health work with the kids, and they make sure that they get into school. And then they help often the women-headed households to start something that can be income producing. Often it's raising chickens. So Mary started to raise chickens, and eventually she was able to get enough money that she was able to start a small stand, a small shop, with a microloan, and eventually has come to a point of stability. But I didn't meet Mary at her house, which now is made of baked brick mud and has a tin metal roof. I met Mary almost 4 miles from there, because Mary had been in Mexico City for about 7 years. And the program of Amextra in that area has closed down. Mary was going as a volunteer 7 miles out to a new area where a new family had just shown up. New families were just showing up. You see, the chickens were about more than chickens. They were about helping a family that had to flee a situation of violence, find an opportunity, a new opportunity in the future. It was the opportunity to help kids into school. It was, in fact, the way of finding a future for Mary and her kids. But it was about more than that, too. It was about Mary finding the dignity and the ability, the gifts that were within her to enter into this ministry and to share with others that were in the same situation. And who would know better than the new household that had just shown up on the outskirts of Mexico City, what that plight was like, but somebody who'd already walked that path and now had found a sense of hope. Chickens, more than chickens. And then finally, I want to tell you this story from the U.S., because about 30% of what happens with the resources, the gifts, the support that you give to ELCA World Hunger goes to work in the United States. These days, one of the big things that are happening around this country are gardens popping up in church yards to help with fresh food or to bring communities of people together. The church garden, we just turned out a church garden guide, and almost half of the guide is prayers and reflections from Luther on gardening and so on, because we also believe that it could be a center of spiritual anchoring, not just a place to grow food. And I was in a church last week where they are starting to have people come every morning to tend the garden, and so they've created a prayer guide when you're there tending the garden to pray while you're in the garden. I thought, where else but the church does gardening become a place for us to come closer to God? It's great. I wanted to tell you about a story, though, from Sacramento, California, because in Sacramento, there's a small Lutheran church struggling really to be for its future, and it is in an area that's the crossfire zone between 2 gangs. And a few years ago, a 6-year-old got in the middle of the crossfire and died. And the church got together and they said, we need to do something about it. What can we do? And they said, well, there's a church, there's the parking lot, and then there was a vacant lot. And they said, we need to clean up that vacant lot so that people can't use it as a place to hide, and let's turn it into a garden. And when they turned it into a garden, an area is for the youth group to grow lavender as a fundraising instrument for them to do ministry. There are small, very small garden plots where people can grow, who are new to the United States and are missing their traditional vegetables, can grow vegetables and invest in those small plots. And then there's an area that is being used to grow food for the local food bank, to bring fresh produce into the food bank. So the investment into that garden in and of itself is yielding astounding returns. But the true meaning of that garden for me is when I was visiting there are some benches in the garden, and I met a woman who was there, and she said, I suffer from chronic anxiety, she said, and my psychiatrist has told me that I have to get out of my apartment for 10 minutes every day. The first few days I couldn't do it, but now I can start to do that because I can come to this garden, and this is my place of peace. In the midst of an urban crossfire zone between gangs, a garden becomes a plot of peace. Food is more than food. Pigs more than pigs. Chickens more than chickens. Gardens more than gardens. It's what we're invested in when we work together as church to respond to the hungers of the world and find the blessings return multiple fold to us as well. So I want to thank you. I want to thank you for the ways that you've supported this work, the ways that you are the face of the ELCA, the hands of God in the midst of the challenges of this community, for the ways that we stand together and the ways that you extend that to others in sharing of resources. My friend says that ELCA World Hunger is built of gifts of all shapes and sizes, and it's true. Lots of it is coins, and some of it are larger gifts for people who have the capability and capacity to do that, are motivated and have a heart, all together with God's blessings through the prayers that you raise for this work and this ministry. Far more is done than we can imagine. And to God be the glory. Amen.